Ever grab your prescription and wonder if, maybe, just maybe, somewhere along the line, someone found a problem with how it was made? Like before it got to you.
Happens more than you think.
Yeah, that's what we're diving into today. Those little notices the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, sends out when they spot something that needs fixing. We call them Form 483 observations, and we're looking at a whole decade's worth, specifically in the drug world.
10 years of, oh, you might want to take a look at this.
Right. So between 2020 and 2024, what were the trends? What kept popping up in these 483s? What are the big issues the FDA has been flagging in drug manufacturing? That's our deep dive today.
Big question is, what does it all tell us about how safe and effective our medicines really are?
Exactly. So to get to the bottom of this, we've got a lot of stuff to look at.
We do, starting with those 483s themselves. That's the core, right? Seeing what the AAA actually found.
Makes sense.
But we also need the context. So the rules, the actual regulations these companies are supposed to be following, that's where the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21, comes in. It's like the Bible of drug manufacturing.
So like chapter and verse of how to make a pill?
Kind of. It's got everything. How you design the buildings, think Part 110. All the lab controls, that's a Part 211. Even down to labeling, that's Part 202.
Sounds thorough.
It's meant to be. But rules are one thing, putting them into practice is another. So we're also looking at guides, handbooks, best practices for things like designing a facility, setting up audits, what a good GMP professional actually does day to day.
Getting into the nitty-gritty.
Gotta. Plus, we've got some real-world stories, investigations from the past, to see how these things play out. And to bring it up to date, we've even got insights from regulatory experts.
Oh, like insider info?
Some of it, and even the FDA themselves, they've got all sorts of stuff on their YouTube channels, training sessions, conferences. It's a mix of, here's what you need to know, and this is what we're seeing out there.
So we're going deep, behind the curtain of how our meds are made. But for our listener, why does all this matter? Why should they care about these 483s?
Because at the end of the day, these observations point to real challenges. Challenges the pharma industry faces in, like consistently hitting that quality bar. And that impacts every single one of us who takes medication.
Right. It's not just paperwork. It's our health.
Exactly. So whether it's about documentation or like how equipment is maintained, understanding these issues helps us see why having strong quality systems in place is so crucial. It's not just red tape. It's about safety and effectiveness.
Gotcha. So today, we're cutting through the jargon, extracting those key insights from all this material. What are the FDA's most common findings? What do they mean for drug quality? And most importantly, how can manufacturers not just fix the problems, but actually prevent them in the first place?
That's it. And right off the bat, when you look at those 483s, one thing is clear. The FDA is seeing this persistent compliance challenges thing. It's like, despite all the rules and the efforts, these issues just keep cropping up.
That's a little worrying. So where are these challenges popping up the most? What's catching the FDA's eye time and time again?
Well, the analysis highlighted a few key areas. The quality control unit, they're supposed to be the guardians of quality, right? But how well are they actually fulfilling those responsibilities? That's one.
Makes sense. What else?
Investigations. When something goes wrong, how deeply are companies digging to figure out why? Are they doing thorough discrepancy investigations?
So it's not just, oops, fixed it. It's why does it happen?
Exactly. Then there's the paperwork. Are there written procedures, their SOPs, up to scratch, complete, accurate, easy to follow? You'd be surprised how often that's an issue.
Paperwork. Always the paperwork.
And then, of course, there's the labs. Are their controls tight enough? Are they using validated methods?
Got it. So basically, are they doing everything by the book to make sure the tests are accurate and reliable?
That's it. And last but not least, equipment maintenance. Are they keeping things clean, calibrated, in good working order?
Right, because a rusty machine can't make good medicine. Okay, let's unpack one of those areas. Let's talk documentation. Those SOPs, the standard operating procedures, why is getting the paperwork right such a huge deal?
Imagine this. You're trying to follow a recipe, but it's got steps missing, ingredients scribbled out, no measurements. How do you know you'll end up with what you're supposed to?
A cake disaster waiting to happen.
Exactly. Drug manufacturing's the same, only with way higher stakes. And that's where regulations like 21 CFR Part 111 come in.
Right, the rule book.
It's for dietary supplements, but the principles apply across the board. Every entry in a record, gotta be clear, signed, or initialed, dated by the person who do it. No mystery meat in the process.
So full transparency.
And if you make a mistake, can't just erase it. Got to cross it out with a single line, initial and date the correction, and explain why you made the change.
Creating a paper trail.
A clear one. And, like the EES Consulting Group folks pointed out, sometimes it's good to have a second pair of eyes. Peer review, especially for critical stuff, catches those little errors before they become big problems.
2 heads are better than 1. And the NZP Safety Hub folks, they had some pretty specific advice on handwritten records, right? It wasn't just about fixing errors.
Oh, yeah, they were all about real-time documentation, do it as you go, no scribbling from memory later, and permanent ink, no fading, no erasing allowed. Even the color can matter. Blue ink for regular stuff, red for approvals, maybe green for changes, all depends on the company's procedure.
Whoa, color-coded drug making, who knew?
It's all about clarity and organization. Oh, and those blank spaces on forms. Not okay. Got to mark them NR for not required or cross them out, initial and date. No sneaking in info later.
Gotcha. So whether it's paper or electronic, you got to maintain that integrity, that trustworthiness of the record.
Absolutely. No tampering, no mystery edits. And speaking of electronic records, they have their own set of challenges. SciLife was all over this. Controlled access, only certain people can make changes. Time-stamped entries, audit trails that track every tweak. You got to review those before a badge is even released. And electronic signatures for approvals.
Makes those digital paper trails a lot more secure. But that CO transcript, they were a bit wary of photocopying, especially with patient info.
Oh yeah, privacy's a big deal. Got to protect that while still maintaining good documentation. It's a balancing act. Okay, let's switch gears. Another area the FDA keeps flagging, lab controls.
The heart of quality, right? So what's going wrong there?
A lot hinges on the test methods. Got to have validated methods. Got to prove that the tests actually measure what they're supposed to reliably and consistently. We saw this in those transcripts from seasons 1 and 3.
Yeah, those examples of tablet testing really stuck with me, like the disintegration test, making sure the pill dissolves properly in your body, or the hardness test, making sure it's not too brittle.
Right. If those tests are off, you could have a drug that doesn't work as intended and you wouldn't even know it. And 21 CFR Part 111 is very clear on this. Got to have solid documentation showing how you came up with the specs for the final product and that you're using the right tests to make sure those specs are met.
Sounds like a lot of pressure on those lab folks.
It's a big responsibility, and it's not just about testing the final product. You got to check the ingredients too, right? 21 CFR Part 111 also talks about examining the paperwork from suppliers, making sure the raw materials are up to snuff, and then you got to quarantine those materials until your own QC lab gives them the thumbs up.
Double checking from the get-go.
Exactly. And don't forget about reserve samples. 21 CFR Parts 211 and 320, they both talk about keeping a portion of each batch stored under the right conditions, just in case you need to go back and retest if there's a problem later on.
Smart. So it's like an insurance policy for quality control.
It is, and this all ties into that idea of rigorous process control we've talked about earlier. From the moment you get those raw materials to the final testing, everything's got to be tightly controlled and documented. And, there are even more advanced approaches. We talked about analytical quality by design, AQBD, in Season 7. That's all about taking a more scientific, proactive approach to developing really robust test methods right from the start.
So staying ahead of the curve. Okay, what about the actual place where these drugs are made? Equipment maintenance, the analysis flagged that as a frequent issue. Why is that such a problem area?
Well, think about it. You're making medicine, right? It's got to be clean, sterile, precise. If the equipment is rusty, poorly calibrated, or just plain dirty, you're asking for trouble. And the FDA knows this. That's why 21 CFR Part 110 is so specific.
It's all about preventing contamination.
Absolutely. Equipment and utensils, they got to be designed right, made of the right stuff, well-maintained, and easy to clean. No shortcuts.
Right, because a dirty pill press is not good for anyone.
And you got to keep records. The EAS Consulting Group was very clear on that. Calibration logs, maintenance logs for every piece of critical equipment. If you can't prove it's working correctly and being properly cared for, you can't guarantee the quality of the drugs you're making.
It's like a car. Got to keep up with those maintenance checks.
Exactly. And Part 110 doesn't stop there. The facilities themselves, where you store stuff, where you package the finished product, all got to be in good shape, clean, sanitized.
No cobwebs in the corner.
Not if you want to stay in business. And then there's the whole issue of validation. You got to prove that the equipment actually does what it's supposed to do consistently and reliably. Hayter's book on validation, it lists all sorts of equipment that usually needs this. Autoclaves, compressed air systems, HVAC, even the machines that fill and label those bottles.
So you're not just assuming it works, you're testing it to make sure.
Exactly. And you got to document those design specs, operating procedures, safety features. It's a whole process. And Jacobs and Senor, they made a great point in their book about GMP facility design. They said the way you design and maintain your facility directly affects how much those drugs cost to make. So it's not just about quality, it's about efficiency too.
Makes sense. So a well-maintained facility and equipment, it's not just checking a box, it's good business all around.
Right. And then there's the issue of when things go wrong, those discrepancy investigations.
Right, because stuff happens. So what's the FDA looking for when there's a problem?
They want to see that you understand your process inside and out and that you're taking steps to control it. That's where process validation comes in. 21 CFR Part 110, it's all about making sure manufacturing happens under controlled conditions. You got to monitor things like time, temperature, humidity.
Keeping everything in that sweet spot.
Exactly. So when something deviates or a batch fails, a thorough investigation is key. You got to dig deep, figure out why, and then take steps to prevent it from happening again. Derivative's GMP handbook actually talks about this. Even when you have to rework a batch, you need a validated process for that.
So it's not just fixing it, it's understanding why it broke in the first place.
And then fixing the process so it doesn't break again. And the FDA has been pushing this idea of a more proactive approach for years now. They even had this pharmaceutical CGMP for the 21st Century initiative, all about encouraging innovation and risk management in manufacturing.
So it's not just about following the rules, it's about understanding the why behind them and using that knowledge to improve.
Exactly. Okay, we've talked about docs, labs, equipment, investigations. But what about the people doing all this work? Training feels like that's got to be huge.
Yeah, you can have the best equipment and procedures, but if the people using them aren't trained properly, it's a recipe for disaster.
Right. And while training deficiencies might not have been in the top 5 most cited categories in those 483s, think about it. How many of those other issues could stem from a lack of training?
Makes sense. A poorly trained worker could mess up documentation, misread a lab test, or operate equipment incorrectly.
Exactly. And we saw this in a couple of those transcripts. The one on FDA requirements for clinical investigators, it was all about making sure everyone involved in a trial is properly trained. And the EAS consulting group, they linked proper training to better data review and stronger quality systems overall.
So investing in training your staff is investing in quality. No shortcuts there.
None. Okay, let's talk about what happens when the FDA does find problems. They issue that Form 483. What does that mean for the company?
Yeah, what are the consequences?
It can be pretty serious. That history of a CGMP medical event investigation text, it talked about how a 483 can lead to more scrutiny, more audits, even regulatory actions. And it's not just Big Pharma that needs to worry. The comprehensive analysis of FDA Form 483 observations made it clear that CDMOs, those contract manufacturers, they're also on the hook.
So no one gets a free pass.
Nope. And ultimately, the biggest impact is on public health. If these quality issues aren't fixed, the safety and effectiveness of the drugs people depend on is at risk.
That's the bottom line. And it could even lead to recalls. We saw that in a couple of those quality risk management sources.
Right. And that FDA training course transcript, it talked about how the FDA categorizes their findings, NII, VAI, OAI. A 483 usually means it's a VAI or OAI, meaning the FDA thinks action is needed.
So it's not just a slap on the wrist. It's a, you need to fix this now.
Exactly. Which brings us to CAPA. Corrective and preventive action. That's how companies address these observations and prevent new ones.
So it's about learning from your mistakes and making things better.
It is, and the FDA is big on this. The FDA Regulatory Affairs text, it explained that a good CAPA system is like the engine of improvement for a company's quality system.
Keeps things running smoothly.
Right, and it's fed by lots of data, audits, testing results, equipment records, even customer feedback. All of that goes into figuring out what went wrong and how to fix it.
So it's not just reacting, it's proactively looking for ways to improve.
Exactly, and the FDA training course transcript, it emphasized responding to each 483 observation individually, say whether you agree or disagree, and then provide a detailed CAPA plan with realistic timelines and ways to check if the fixes actually worked.
So it's a detailed action plan.
It is, and that CAPA for the FDA-regulated industry text, it highlighted that how fast you got to implement those CAPAs depends on the risk. Some of things are critical, got to be fixed yesterday. Others, you've got a bit more breathing room.
Makes sense. So it's a tailored approach depending on the severity of the issue.
Right, and then there's quality risk management. It's all about being proactive. ICHQ9, Season 3, all those quality risk management sources talked about this. You identify potential problems before they happen, assess the risks, and then put controls in place to minimize those risks.
So you're staying a step ahead.
Exactly, and there are tools to help with this. FMEA, failure mode and effects analysis, that's a big one. You basically brainstorm all the ways something could go wrong and then figure out how to prevent it.
So being prepared for anything. Okay, let's wrap up. What are the big takeaways from this deep dive into a decade of FDA 483s?
It's clear that certain things are absolutely crucial in drug manufacturing. Documentation, it's got to be thorough, meticulous. Lab controls, stringent, reliable. Equipment, well-maintained, calibrated, and the processes themselves got to be validated.
No room for error there.
None. And training, can't emphasize that enough. Everyone involved needs to know the rules, the procedures, inside and out. And underpinning all of this is CAPA, that commitment to fixing problems and continuously improving. It's what keeps everything running smoothly and ensures those medicines are safe and effective.
And this might seem like technical stuff, behind-the-scenes stuff, but it affects all of us.
It does. These aren't just regulations on a piece of paper. They're about our health, our well-being.
Exactly. So here's a final thought for our listeners. The pharma industry is always evolving. New drugs, new technologies. How do we keep up? How do regulators and manufacturers adapt to ensure quality stays high and these recurring issues are addressed? And how do we maintain public trust in the system? It's a big question, and it's one we all need to be thinking about.
It is, and for those who want to dig deeper, check out the FDA's website. They've got a public database of 483s. You can see what they're finding out there. Plus, they've got tons of resources on GMP, those good manufacturing practices. And the ICH, the International Council for Harmonization, they've got some great guidelines, too. Knowledge is power, right?
It is. All right, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.